Hey, what's up, guys? In this lesson, we will be connecting our front-end application or the UI that we had created in the previous video, and we will go ahead and connect it to the back end. So, to connect it to the back end, we need to make sure of a few things before we start doing that. So, the first thing that we need to make sure is that the backend is running. So, the backend that we had created was in the folder called to-do list-be. So we will go ahead and activate the virtual environment, and after doing that we will run the Python file that will start the server on localhost 5000. So our backend is start up and running now, and to connect our application to the backend we will be requiring a library called Axios that is used to send API calls from JavaScript, so that uh, asynchronously, so that we can do a lot of good stuff with that. So to install the Axios package, we need to type in yarn add Axios and press enter. That will add the Axios package to your package.json, and we can start using Axios straight away. So I will wait for this to get completed. So now that is done, the next thing we want to do is make sure that your front end is also running on port 3000, and we need to start working with Axios. So the way we work with state is that we, in our application component, we define a variable called state and make it an object. So state is an empty object for now. We don't really need to change anything, and once we do, I will update you. The next thing we want to do is add a method called component did mount. So we will type in component did mount, and this is the function that gets fired every time our component loads up on the screen. So whenever our app component will load up on the screen, component did mount will work. To check that, we will console dot, or we will alert hello. We will hit save and reload our application. It says hello, and then our application component mounts. So we can reload this page. It says hello and application mounts. So you can see how component did mount works. Now we want to fetch a list of all the task lists whenever our component mounts. So to do that, we use the Axios library, and the way that the Axios library works is, first is that you have to define a URL. So let's say get list get lists URL, or we will, and make it equal to http localhost 5000 slash task lists. If you remember from our backend video, we had created a URL called an endpoint called slash task lists, which returns all of our uh, task list. So instead of lists URL, we'll get list URL, we'll just name it lists URL. Now that that is done, we will use Axios, and first we need to import Axios from Axios. So import Axios from Axios, and this library is used to send an asynchronous XML, HTTP, or REST API request. So we will make an Axios get request to the lists URL, and the way this works is it then handles the response using a then function. So what it's saying is make a get request to this URL, and if it's successful, then do this. So we will say we will console, or we will alert, and the then response takes in a response object, which is basically the response that we get from the API. So it takes in a response object, and does you can do a lot of stuff with the response. So you can work with the response after that. So after we receive the response, which means the request is successful, we alert and say response successful, response received. And if this goes into an error, it we can chain a catch method which then catches if an error is received from the API. And just like response, catch receives an error, so err, and we can alert the error. So we will alert and pass in the error in this response. So we will save that. It will reload our localhost. Yeah, that's because we haven't typed in const. So it gives us an error that a list URL is not defined, and that is because we haven't given the const precursor to this. And that happens very often when you're shifting languages and you're moving from Python to, let's say, JavaScript. You need to remember the syntax for each language. So we have created a constant called list URL, and we will save this file now. Once that is done, it gives us an error, and that means that it was unable to make that XML HTTP request because of a network error. And this is happening because in our Python code we haven't really enabled CORS yet. So we will open our by first enabling the virtual environment. We will open the Python. We will open this project in code, Visual Studio Code, and we will just perform a simple step, and that is enabling CORS. So we will use from flask CORS import CORS. And to make your app accessible to any kind of front end, we will just pass in the CORS function. In the CORS function we will pass in the app. That's it. That's all you have to do. You will hit save. That should reload the code. And once you reload this application, we do not receive an error now because it is taking in requests. It says response received. So once we receive a response, we need to do something with it. So let's alert the response so we can see what is the response that we are receiving. So I will type in response as an alert, reload this page, and you can see that it returns an object. Basically we are receiving a JSON from the API, so it is telling us that we are receiving an object. So we need to parse this object, and the object contains all of the actual response in a property called data. So response has a property called data that you can view. So once I console log, we won't alert this anymore because we really want to see what is inside this data. So I will console log this data. I will save this and it should reload the page. uh, and now you won't see any alert because we have removed that, but in the console over here you see that we receive an object which has the task list array that contains two things. The first is the name work, the task list work, and the second is the task list home. So I think you already are able to see how we are working with external backends and how we are receiving data and what we can do with the data. So now that we have received this data, we need to store it in the state. Now we can start building our state. So the first property in our state should be the lists property, which is an empty array for now. But whenever we receive the response, we assign the state to have assign the list property in the state to have, I'm sorry, this is an object, so it should be a colon, to have the response that we received. So it should be this, which means that we are accessing the class itself, and using the set state function we will pass in the object that we want to set. And in this case we want to set the list property, so we will type in list, and what the resource we want to set it to is the response we got from the API, the data property inside the response, and the response data contains a task list property, so we will add task list and we will hit save. And once we do that, we are able to store it in the state, and to check that we will console.log the state, this dot state. Now that we have updated that, we'll save it, and once we receive the list, now our state contains a list that contains a list of the names of the task list, work and home. So we will name this more aptly and name it as lists, and this will reload the page and we will receive the lists of uh, and rename this also to lists. Once that is done, we will reload the page and it will receive a lists and array 2 which has the task list and their names. So now that we have received these task lists, we can render this to the task lists component, and to do that we need to pass that as props. To pass anything as props, you simply create a new attribute. So the task lists component should take an attribute, let's say lists, and it should be this dot state dot lists, and this will pass the lists that we have received from the API to the task lists component. We will hit save and nothing will change right now, but to see what we are changing, we will go into the task lists component, and instead of an empty bracket we will pass in props, which means that it is now taking props from the higher order component. And to see whether we are receiving lists or not, we will simply pass in a condition inside our JSX, which can be if this props dot list dot length is greater than 0, which means that we are checking whether the lists received by the task list component has a length of more than 0. So which means that it has multiple lists. We will print out using a AND operator, we will print out that we have received the list. Now it will reload our application, and you can see that it does print it out, but you're not able to see it because again the sidebar is overlaying over that. So we will just copy paste this part and put this inside the menu item where we have mentioned our logo, just to see whether we are receiving the props correctly or not. So we will save that, and you see that after a momentary delay it says lists received. So I will just close this and reload the page. You see it says list received. So that means we are able to receive the list from the props that were sent via the app.js file. So we see that this list is sending all those lists that were set during the state change, and we are receiving them successfully in the task list component. The next thing we want to do in the task list component is list the task list instead of these menu items that we have hard coded completely. To do that, we will remove all of these menu items except one, the first one. Except that, we will uh, remove all of the other menu items, uh, all of the named menu items, and we will iterate over all the lists we have received. So props dot lists dot map. So we are using the map function, and if you would have followed the basics of JavaScript lesson in this course, you know how map works. It takes in another object, and we can name this anything. Let's say list. We can name this list, and then it does something with this object. So with this object we need to return a menu item. Each name should have its own menu item. So we will return a menu item, which is menu dot item, and item, and inside the menu item we should have the name of the list. So that should be list dot name. And now we will remove this work function because we have referenced it, and we will save. Once we save, you see now that we are receiving the names of the lists from our API, and this is because we had created a work and a home list when we were building our API. To check whether this is happening correctly, we will go to Postman, and we will make another post request to our API, localhost 5000 task lists, and in the body we will have a raw JSON object, as you remember, and we will create a name with, let's say, exercise, and we will send this request to our API. It says that we had a 200 OK, which means we were able to create a new task list. And to check whether that is working, we will reload our front end application, which is receiving the lists from our backend. So I will refresh this page. As now you can see, we also have an exercise task list. So we are successfully receiving all the lists for this, all the lists from our backend. Now the next thing we want to do is to make these menu items clickable, and on each click we need to set the current list so that we can change the text over here. So to make that, we will make a new handler function in our JavaScript code, in our React code, and that handler function, it will be in app.js, because app.js is basically our higher order component. So right underneath component did mount, we'll create a new function called update list, and that it takes it's an empty arrow function, uh, and it takes the name as of the list as an and it takes the list object as an argument, and it sets the state, and we will add in a new property to the state called current list, and it is an empty object, or for that matter we will just set it to null for now. And it passes the list object to our and we pass the list object that we are receiving from the API in this update list method, and set the state, and we will set the current list attribute to the list object. So we will set the list that we are receiving from the button on the sidebar, and set our state's current list property according to that. So once that is done, we need to pass this handler function to the task list component, because uh, the buttons in the sidebar are inside the task list component. So we will type in update list and pass in this dot update list. Now that means that the task list component is receiving the update list method. Now we need to update the task list component, and specifically the menu item inside the task list component, to fire the on click handler and handle it by using props dot update list. And because uh, we want to pass the list object itself, in the method call we will pass in the list that we are receiving from the map function. And I will save this. And just to check if our function is working, in our set update list method, we will also console log our state dot current list. Alright, now should reload our page, and these should be clickable. And to check whether our function is working, we will open the inspect panel, and in the console we will click on work, and it says null, it says work. So basically in the first iteration we changed the state from null to work. So now our current state has work. Now another handy tool that I want to show you that you can use with React is the React dev tools that you can download from a website. Chrome extension, you can just type in React Chrome extension, and you in the Chrome web store you have something called the React developer tools, and then you can install this in your browser. Once you have installed this, you will see in your developer console towards the right hand side you will have a React option. In the React option you have a list of all the components that you have created. So in our case we have created the app component, the task list component, the task component. To check what the current state is, I will just click on the task list component and update list. Sorry, I will click on the app component and check what the current list is. So the current list is home, so I will click on work and it will change to work, and it will change to exercise. So we are able to successfully update the selected list. So now to reflect that change onto this and make the specific uh, menu item active, we will then uh, pass in the current list property to the task list component. This dot state dot current list, and then I will save, and then we will move into the task list component, and in the task list component we will add the active property when the, and as active is a boolean, it will be active if it's true and it will be inactive if it's false. So let's set it to true, and you will see that once our page reloads all of the menu items appear active, but that's not what we want. We want the current state to be active. So let's let's set it to active only when props dot current list dot name, which is the name of the current list in our app state, is equal to the name of this list. So list dot name, and I will hit save. That should reload our application. And doing this should give you an error stating that you cannot read property name of null. And the reason that this is happening is because in our app.js file our default is set to null, and whenever load that page, it looks for a property name which we are referencing in the task list file name, but currently the current list is set to null, so it is not able to read the property name of a null object. So that is why it is throwing this error. Now to circumvent this error, we need to pass in an empty object. We need to pass in an empty list object in our app.js state, and to do that we will just instead of null we will pass in a new object and set its name to nothing and id to nothing again, and we will save this, and reloading this it should work, and nothing is selected here because we haven't clicked on any of this menu item yet. So let's say if I click on work, it makes the work list item active, then it makes the home list item active, then it makes the exercise list item active. So our activation function is working. The next thing we want to do is, upon clicking this work, and we should update the list over here. So when I click work, it should say tasks under work. When I click home, it should say tasks under home, and so on. So to do that, we need to pass in the current list. Uh, we need to pass in the current list to the tasks component, this component, not the task list component, but the tasks component. So we will pass in current list, this dot state dot current list, and then we should update the current list text part in our tasks component. So let's say we click on the tasks component, we should pass in props into the tasks component first, so that we can handle the properties being passed to this component. And instead of this work, we should type in props dot task or props dot current list dot name. And so once we hit save, it should update the task. As we haven't selected any task list yet, it shows tasks under and no name. If we say work, it selects work and home and exercise. So we are able to update the name of the task list under there. I just remove this error. And also, this is not a very good practice to not show anything when nothing is selected, as this is bad user experience, and it makes our uh, app look really confusing. So one thing we need to do is to show this section only when a list is selected. Let's say this should come only, let's say, if the work is selected or home is selected. So to do that, we will pass in a conditional over here, and this till this modal. So all of this content needs to be displayed only when we receive a proper current list. First, we will have to wrap all of the returning content into one div tag, because a conditional can only return one tag in total. So we will close this div tag and hit save. And the contention should be that props current list dot name is not equal to the an empty quotes, because when we don't set our current list, the it is set to an empty quote in our app.js state. So once this is true, which means that the current list name is not empty quotes, we can return this div. So we will save that, should reload our code, and you can see that now we haven't selected any lists yet, so it is showing a blank page. And once we select work, it shows tasks under work, under home, under exercise. Now to circumvent that blank page, we should also add something over here to tell that they haven't selected any list. So we'll just use a module called for this we will be using the message component in our semantic UI React documentation, and we will just simply import the message component from semantic UI and work with that. So if this is not displayed, so we will type in a condition that it is equal to empty string. So props dot current list dot name is equal to empty list. Then we want to return a message component, so we will import the message component, and in the message component we should have a message tag and close that, and in that we should have a header. You haven't selected any lists yet, and we will close the message header. And in the content we'll have a p tag that will show, please select a list from the left side panel or create a new one. We will save this, and now it shows that you haven't selected any lists yet. Please select a list from the left side panel or create a new one. So this makes our UI a little more explanatory and a little more useful. So once we click on a list, that gets removed, and if we reload, it says you haven't selected any list. We'll give it a good color of, let's say, info, which is a we'll give it a teal color because we are following a pattern here, so we'll give it a teal color. So it says you haven't selected any lists yet, and then we can select and that text gets removed. So that's working fine. Now the next thing we want to do is that once we select a task list, it should update the list of tasks over here according to the lists, according to the tasks that are created in our backend database. So to do that, we need to make another handler function of whenever a task list menu item is clicked. So we will move into an app.js directory, and to our state we will add a property called tasks and make it an empty array for now. And in our update list method, whenever the list gets updated, we want to make a get request. So we will use axios dot get. Our URL should be called const tasks URL, which should be http localhost 5000 slash tasks. So we will make a get request to the tasks URL, and then if the result is successful, we will alert we will use the response argument passed to this function and console.log the response. But if we do receive an error, we will send in a catch method to receive the error and console.log the error. Now we'll hit save, and right now we don't see anything, but if we click, I will open the console by using the inspect panel, and I will click on one of this menu item over here. So it sends the object, so it sends the request to the API, and as you can see in the network panel, each time I click on one of these menu items, it sends a request and receives the status with 200. To see the response, I will go into the console and see what our response is. So our response has a property called data. In this data we received an empty array, and there's a simple reason for that, because in our API we need to send a list ID query parameter in the URL itself, so that we are able to get tasks for that list specifically. So we will use uh, the character just above the tab button in your keyboard to make quotes and to pass in a interpolated string. That is you do that using an AND symbol, and in that AND symbol you can pass an actual variable. So we will pass in this dot state dot current list dot id, and this will happen only when the current list is updated. So we need to pass that as is this as a query variable. So we will pass in list underscore id equals to this. Now we will save this and leave the console open. We don't receive anything yet, but we need to make a request and select a task list. So we'll click on the work task list. So once we run that request, and if we check in the console, we receive a XML HTTP request, and that is because we are passing the state current list variable itself. We need to pass the list that we are receiving from our task list component. So we will just update this, and instead of current list, we will type in list. You will remove this dot state and we will type in list dot id, and then we will hit save, and our web page should reload. And once we hit save and click on work, we receive some data, and this data is contains in two length array, and this array contains our tasks: cook food, take dog for a walk. So if whenever we click on our selected whenever we click on a selected task list, we receive inside the data, we receive the array. So this is an empty array because in our home it is not, our home task list does not contain any tasks yet, and same for the exercise task list. So once we are receiving the task list, we need to do something with it, and that is to set the tasks. So instead of console logging the response, we will use set state. So this dot set state, and we will set the tasks property to the response data tasks. If that is how the organization is, the response data and tasks. So yeah, we will use the response data and tasks. So once that is done, I will hit save, and then it should reload. It should reload, and I will, and once we will open the React panel, and in this React panel we will type in the app component because that is the state we want to change. So you can see that the tasks part of the state is empty right now because we have not selected any of the task list yet. And to do that, we'll select it and it updates the task list. So now our state in the tasks, the tasks property in our state is receiving the tasks for the specific task list. If I click on home, it has 0 because home does not have any task list yet, and exercise also 0 because it does not have a task yet. Now that we're receiving the tasks, we should display them over here. So we need to pass the tasks property from a state to as a prop to the tasks component. So tasks should be this dot state dot task, and we will save this and open our tasks.js file. And you can see over here we are manually typing out all the checkboxes, and that was done just to see if it's working or not. But now that we have our tasks, the next thing we should do is move over all the tasks, and to do that we'll use props.tasks.map, and in that map we will pass in a task and return a checkbox, which the checked property will be set to the completed property of the task. So task dot completed, which can be true or false, and the label will be the text of the task. So task dot text, and we will save that. We should receive an error, and that is because we have closed this task, this checkbox component yet. We should save that, and upon reloading it, it should be props and not prop. Again, we'll save that. It should reload. I will close the console here and select work. So you can see it is still displaying the original tasks, but it is also displaying the tasks that we received from our API. So we will remove the tasks we had hard coded before. So that should be all of this, and then also add 2 line breaks. But because anything you return in a conditional should only be inside one tag, we will close this inside a div tag and save that. So now if I click on work, I get the tasks for the work task list, and that is because we are receiving it from our API. To check whether these API is receiving the task list correctly, and if it is able to sense if the task is completed or not, we'll use uh, alright. So we are receiving the tasks. Now the next thing we want to do is code to add new task list and add a new task. So first I'll read the modal and name it as add new task. The next thing we will want to do is to add the functionality of adding a new task list and a new task to this application, and to do that we need to handle the input for each modal over here. To do that, we will create a new text handling function and call it update text, and we will pass in a type. We will pass in a JavaScript synthetic event, which happens every time you start typing on an input field or click something or right click. It registers an event, and then uses that event to manipulate your HTML. So in this case, we'll pass that event, and we will set state using this dot set state. We will set the e dot target dot name to equals to e dot target dot value. Now I know you are a little confused at what this is, and I'll make it a lot more clearer to you by moving to our task list component. In a task list component, the modal contains an input tag. We will give this input tag a name of, let's say, new list name. So this is our name, all right, and we will pass in the app.js file. Now that we've created this update text function, we will pass this to our task list component. So update text function is equal to this dot update text. We need to use the same function for creating a new task, so we will also pass this to the tasks component. So task update text equals to this dot update text. Now both the task list component and the task component are receiving the update text prop as a function. Now the thing I want to make you understand is, like, if we are in the task list component, for example, if we click on add new list and we click on this text field, we have given this text field a name of new list name. So this name is the name of this text field, and whenever I type something, let's say hello, so this hello is the value of this text field. So what this code in our app.js is doing is that it is setting the name property to the value of the text field. So our name is the new list name, and our value is, let's say, work. So it sets in our state new list name to work. So that is how this works. So to check whether this is working, we will assign the update text uh, we will assign the update text function to the input in a task list component. So in our input, we will type in update text equal, and we will handle the on change function. So on change, whenever value in this input changes, we will handle this by using the props dot update text, because we are receiving that from our parent component, which is the app component. So we will do that. Now we should reload our page, and we will inspect our console, and we will move to the React tab. In the React tab, we'll click on app, and it has, you can see in its state we don't really have a new list name property yet, and to do that we'll click on add new list. It will open up the console, the modal, and we will type in hello, right? So if I inspect the modal again, I'm able to you can see that we are receiving the new list name as hello. So it depends on what we are changing it with. Hello. So let's change it to something else. Let's say food. So it gets updated on our state, so we can use this. So we can send a request to an API. Whenever this is done, we can click on this button and send a request to the API to create the new list. So we will do that next. So in our modal button, we in our app.js file, we will create a function called create new entity, and this can be used to create a new list or a new task, whatever you want to do. So in this case, we will have a type which will tell what kind of entity we are creating. So we are passing a type argument in this case, and the next property that will be uh, and the next thing should be the text. which can be two things. It can be the which can be two things. It can either be the text, which the name of the new list, or it can be the text of a new task. So this makes this function polymorphic, which is a very good practice because we need to write only this function once, and it can be reused by both of the components. So to do that, we will check the condition. If our type is equal to let's say list, then we'll do something. And if our type is not equal to list, which means we are creating a task, we'll do something else. Now what does this do something mean? This do something, what we're doing is sending a post request to the two different URLs we have. So we will define our two URLs here. Const let's say tasks, let's say lists URL equals to HTTP localhost 5000, and our specification is tasks, oh sorry, is lists, sorry, it is task lists. And if the request we receive is for type list, then we can send a axios.post request to the list URL, and we need to pass a request data, or a request JSON that will be passed to make a new list. The only thing that this requires is a name. Only thing required to send to the API to create a new task list is the name. So we will type in name and the name of the task list, and the name of the task list is stored in our state. So this dot state dot new list name. All right, so that is what we are going to do, and then we will then use the function then and pass the response and console.log that. And if we do receive an error, we will catch the response and console.log that. So if we so we will save this, and then in our this button we will add the functionality to send the request to the API. To do that, we will open our task lists component, and in the button we will add a new handler called on click, and it should fire the props dot add entity, or whatever the function is named, I forgot. It is create new entity. So in this props dot create new entity. हेलो, हाँ जी आंटी, हेलो, कैसे आंटी? मैं ठीक हूँ आंटी, आप कैसे? अच्छा बढ़िया आंटी। हाँ जी हाँ जी। क्या हो गया? वेदिका आई नहीं अभी आज? अच्छा अच्छा। हम्म। हाँ जी हाँ जी। अरे वो 2-3 दिन की बात है बस, मैं तो थर्सडे को ही आ रहा हूँ। समझ गया, मैं मेरे साथ भी हो जाता है ऐसे कभी कभी। नहीं अच्छा, आपने फ़ोन कर दिया, फ़ोन करके तो हम बात कर ही सकते हैं ना। हम्म, हाँ जी। हाँ हाँ। हाँ जी। वो तो ठीक ही होने वाला है आंटी, अब तो शाम तक तो ठीक हो जाएगा। नहीं बट वो आ जाएगी तो आपको थोड़ा बेटर लगेगा ना, एटलीस्ट लोनली तो नहीं होगा। मैं मेरे को एग्जैक्टली समझ में आता है आपको कैसा लग रहा है अभी। हाँ खुश है। जी। और आप? काम कर रहा हूँ आंटी, और क्या करूँ? हम्म। क्या कर? टाइम नहीं है आंटी। वो तो मैं कर लेता। नहीं आंटी, ऐसा नहीं है। नहीं, ऐसा नहीं करता मैं, ये कंप्लेंट नहीं कर रहा। जी। हम्म। अच्छा। हम्म। हम्म। हाँ जी। ठीक है, समझ गया। हम्म। तो क्या डेट क्या दी थी? फिर डेट क्या दी उसने? हम्म। अच्छा अच्छा। और फिर उसके बाद हमारे पास एक ड्राफ्ट हो गया ना। फिर उसके बाद हमारे पास एक ड्राफ्ट होएगा ना। हाँ हाँ। हम्म। हम्म। हाँ जी। अच्छा अच्छा। हम्म। हम्म। अच्छा। अच्छा ठीक है। ठीक है। अच्छा। ठीक है। और घूम तो कहीं नहीं रहा हूँ, तो कमरे में बैठा हूँ। नहीं नहीं, वो चले गए। वो चले गए। हम्म। परसों। हम्म। हाँ उनसे मिल गया था, बट उनकी बिजनेस छुट्टी तो चल गए। मॉम है, मैं हूँ बस। नहीं, मम्मी तो कुक ही नहीं करी, मैंने उनको बोल दिया लिटरली कि जब तक मैं हूँ तब तक आप कुक मत करो, तो वो कुक नहीं करती, मैं ही करता हूँ। हम्म। थैंक यू। हाँ वो थोड़े रैशेज हो गए थे, बट वो वायरल फीवर की वजह से हुए थे, ज़्यादा कुछ सीरियस नहीं था। कल डॉक्टर के पास गए थे, तबीयत तो ठीक है। हम्म। ठीक है आंटी, ये तो मैं करेगा। ओके आंटी। ओके आंटी, थैंक यू। ठीक है। ओके आंटी। नहीं नहीं आंटी, 11। मैं आ सकता हूँ 15 का, तो 15 का आ जाऊँगी, प्रॉब्लम नहीं। क्योंकि मेरी रिटर्न टिकट बुक नहीं हुई अभी। नहीं बट फिर वो हो जाएगा ना, लाइक अगर थर्सडे की जगह मैं ऐसे नहीं देखता, फिर मैं कंसिडर करता हूँ, आपको पता नहीं तो। ओके बाय आंटी। बाय आंटी। ओके बाय। And in the on-click and in the on-click handler, we want to pass in props.createNewEntity, which is the function we had defined in our app.js file, and in that we will pass in the type, which is a list, because we want to create a list with this function. And so, and to make sure that it is doesn't get fired every time this component is loaded, we will wrap this in another empty uh, single line function, arrow function. So we will save that and save this and open app.js. Check. Alright, so we will save that and in this case we will open a create a new list, and we will type the name of the list, which should be, let's say, uh, what should I say, videos, and then I will add list. And you see that we are getting an error. props.create new entity is not a function, and that is because in our app.js file we have created a function called create new entity, and in the task list object we have not passed it yet. So in the past we will pass that object using create new entity as the date, and this should be set to this dot create new entity, and we will save that now that it is receiving that as props. And to check that, we will open the inspect panel. We will open the console, sorry, the React tab. On the React tab I will search for task lists component, and in the task list component you can see that we are receiving the create new entity function. So now we can create new entity by clicking on the button. So we will add a new list, and let's say we will name it videos and add list. Now you cannot see the list over here, but it should be created. And to check that, we'll reload the page, and you can see that the videos list is being updated over here. To automatically update this, we need to find a way to update the state every time the request goes through. And because the request went through, all that we need to do is that in this create new entity function, whenever the Axios then function is called, we were console logging it. Instead of that, we will set state. We will then use Axios to get the list of list URL, get the lists, and then update the state using the response function res this dot set state, and we will set it to res dot data dot dot task list, because we are receiving that as our object. And the key we will set this task list to will be our in our state we have a property called lists, so we will set lists to that. So this should work now, and once it reloads the server, we can add a new list, and we will name this list test. And add this list, you can see that it appears automatically over here. So we are able to create a new list and add it to the list of lists on the right side, and that works completely. We can also click on the specific list and see the lists inside the specific task list. See the tasks inside this specific task list. The next functionality you want to add is to add a new task, and it's going to be very similar to this handler function. So we will just update the uh, tasks URL and set it to http localhost 5000 tasks. And in the else condition, we will copy paste whatever we have done in the if condition of the first case, and instead of the list URL we will type in tasks URL, and instead of the name we will set this to task text name, and the ID, the list ID required to create this task would be this dot state dot current list dot ID. So we have, now that we have that working, we also need to do one more other thing. So instead of list URL, we will into tasks URL, and then we will set the tasks to rest.data.tasks. So this should create a new task, but we haven't done one thing yet, and that is to pass in the update text and create new entity functions into the tasks component. Once we do that, we will open up the tasks component, and in our tasks component we will update the input, give it a name, which should be new task name, and then we will give an on change handler, which should be props dot update text, and in this case we want it to be a task, so we will do that. Props dot update text. So to check whether this is working, we will reload the application, uh, open up the React panel, and in that we will, in the app component, we will just add a new task and type anything. So we can see that the new task name is being received from the component, so we can work with that. Now that that's happening correctly, the next thing we want to do is to add an on click handler to the button in the tasks modal, and that is the same as the previous one, uh, just that create new entity, and instead of passing a list we will pass in task. We should hit save, and if we go to our work list and we add a new task, let's say okay, and close this, and then we will move into one of the task lists. Let's say we'll move into home, and then we will type in the name of the task and then click add tasks. It gives an internal error from the server, and you can see what the problem is. Actually, the problem is that we are not being able to pass the name in this request, as we have only sent the list ID. We also need to pass the name, and to pass the name, which is the text of this ad, it should be new task name, not new list name. We'll hit save, and now it should work correctly, most probably. And now it should work. So if I click, let's say, the home task, I will tap the input and I will type anything. Let's say in the home task I will buy groceries, and then click add task. It doesn't give me an error, and it doesn't update it. Let's add a new task, name it anything. Alright, so the error that we are receiving is that it is going to the task URL, but in the task URL we haven't stated the name of the list. So we will do that using the same method we used before. So we will type in list ID equals to inside the interpolation I will add this dot state dot current list dot id, and instead of double quotes I will use this symbol so that I can interpolate it properly. Save that, and now adding a new task should work. Let's add task, and that works, and we see that the task that we just created gets added to the list. So let's add a task called test task and add it. Once we click the tab, we see that it gets created. So now we are able to, our application is able to add a new list, test 3, let's say. It creates a new list, and if we want to create a new task in a specific task list, we'll just type in the text of the task. Let's say okay, and add task. You see that it's able to add it. The only functionality left now is to update the status of these tasks, which means that only thing we need to do is update the checked version of these tasks. So to do that, I will uh, to handle that, I will create a new function, a handler function called update status, and it takes the ID as an argument, and we pass in the ID to this function, and we set our update task URL equals to our URL for our update task, which is http localhost 5000 space tasks space the ID of the task. So we will interpolate the number, the ID, so that we are receiving from our argument, and make it interpolable. interpolable, and once that is done, to define this as a constant, so constant update task. So whenever an update task function is triggered, it sends an Axios put request, because now we are using the last endpoint put to the update tasks URL, and if that request is successful, it refreshes the list of the tasks. So let's say then response, in the then handler of the response, we will send another Axios request, get request this time, and we will send it to get the tasks URL. So const tasks URL equals to http localhost 5000 and tasks, and in the query parameter we will give list id is equal to current 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 list dot id, and this belongs to the state, so this dot state dot current list dot id. So now that we have that working, we need a get request to the tasks URL, and in this response we will handle the then function and get a list of all the tasks for that task list. So response will let us set state, so this dot set state, and we want to change the tasks property now that one of them has been updated. So the task is called res.data.tasks, and it gets updated, and if we do receive an error, we will console.log it res or error and console.log that. We have created the update status, uh, should be a dollar function and not a hash. So yeah, that's that. So we have created our update status function, and now we need to pass it to the tasks function, to the tasks component, and we will give an update task, and that should be this dot update task. Sorry, it should be update status and not update task. We will save that, move into a tasks component, and in a tasks component, wherever we are listing the checkbox, it should be, we'll add a new handler function on change, and we will fire the update status function that we are receiving from props. So update status, and inside this update status we will pass in task dot id. So now that we have done that, we should reload the page. It is giving us a function, it is giving us a error that update status is not defined, and that is because we are receiving update status from the props and we haven't told it to receive it from there. So props dot update status. So we will reload the page now, and we can see that now we are able to update this bit. and we have made a typo over here, which is because of which we are not able to receive the response task. So instead of task, we will receive tasks, and we'll save that. Once we do that, we can check or uncheck. As you can see, we can then check or uncheck. As you can see now, we are able to uncheck. So now, as you can see, we are able to check and uncheck the task list, and it persists this data, uh, and it works. So